No, the Alpha King said, and Claire Bennett felt 3 years of promises vanish in a single breath. The word did not echo through the council chamber. It did not need to. Silence carried it farther than any shout could have. Claire stood 10 feet from Ethan Blackwood beneath the high arched windows of the royal hall, her hands folded carefully in front of her so no one would see them tremble. Morning light spilled across the polished stone floor, catching the silver bracelet around her wrist, the one Ethan had fastened there himself on a quiet winter night when no counselors had been watching. Back then, his voice had been low and certain. Someday, I won't have to hide this. Now more than 40 representatives from the northern packs sat in 2 curved rows around them, their formal coats dark against the pale stone walls, every pair of eyes fixed on the Omega standing alone before the throne. Elder Margaret Hayes remained perfectly still at the center table. "Your Majesty," she said, as though perhaps she had misunderstood him. "For the record, I will ask again. Is Claire Bennett your fated mate?" Claire looked at Ethan. She should not have. Some small, stubborn part of her still believed his eyes would tell her what his mouth could not. Only that morning, before the council bells rang, he had found her near the east stairwell and taken her hand where no one could see. "Trust me," he had whispered. 2 words. She had carried them into this room like armor. Now Ethan sat beneath the Blackwood crest of his family, broad-shouldered and motionless, silver-gray eyes fixed somewhere just beyond her. Not on her. Never quite on her. "No," he repeated. This time Claire felt something inside her go strangely quiet. There was pain, yes, but it arrived from far away, as if it belonged to another woman standing in another room. What she noticed instead was the cold edge of the bracelet against her skin, the faint scrape of a chair as someone shifted, the scent of cedar smoke drifting from the fireplace. Little things. Ordinary things. It seemed impossible that the world could remain so ordinary while hers changed shape. A murmur moved through the council. Claire heard. Fragments. Mistaken. Ambitious. An Omega should have known better. She kept her chin level. 3 years ago, she had felt the bond awaken the first time Ethan touched her hand beneath the lanterns of the Moon Harvest Festival. He had felt it too. She knew because his breath had stopped. Because he had whispered her name like he had been searching for it all his life. Claire Bennett. Not Omega Bennett. Not servant. Not commonborn. Claire. For 3 years, he had come to her in quiet hallways, private gardens, empty libraries after midnight. Always careful. Always kind. Always asking for a little more time. The kingdom wasn't ready. The council needed convincing. His enemies would use her against him. She had believed him because love made patience feel noble. Standing before the council now, Claire finally understood the difference between patience and permission. She had given him time. Somewhere along the way, he had decided that meant she would wait forever. Elder Hayes folded her hands. Then the council recognizes that no royal mate bond exists between His Majesty and Claire Bennett. Several members nodded. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Claire saw it because she had spent 3 years learning every small movement of his face. Once, that knowledge had made her feel cherished. Now it only made the distance between them sharper. One councilman leaned toward another and whispered something that ended with a quiet laugh. Claire did not look at him. She looked only at Ethan. For one heartbeat, his gaze finally met hers. There it was. Regret. Fear. And beneath both, something almost pleading. He wanted her to understand. He wanted her to forgive him before he had even asked. Claire slowly lowered her eyes to the silver bracelet around her wrist. Her thumb brushed the tiny crescent engraved on its clasp. 3 years of hidden promises rested in that small piece of metal. Across the chamber, Ethan shifted forward in his chair. "Claire," he said softly. Her name. At last. But something had already changed. She lifted her head, calm settling over her with a clarity that frightened even her. If the Alpha King wanted the council to believe there was no bond between them, then perhaps she would stop protecting the secret he had just denied. And for the first time that morning, Ethan Blackwood looked afraid. Claire had imagined many versions of the day Ethan finally acknowledged her before the council, but none of them had included the way he looked at her now, as though he had just stepped too close to the edge of something he could not undo. Elder Hayes began reading the council record, her measured voice filling the chamber, yet Claire barely heard the words. Her attention remained on Ethan. 3 years of memories rose between them, quiet and unwelcome. The first had been beneath the lanterns of the Moon Harvest Festival, when Claire had been carrying folded linens through the lower courtyard and Ethan had reached out to steady a basket slipping from her arms. The moment his fingers closed around her hand, the world had seemed to pause. His silver-gray eyes had widened. Claire had forgotten how to breathe. Neither of them had needed anyone to explain what had happened. The bond had announced itself in the sudden warmth beneath her ribs and in the stunned way Ethan whispered, "Claire." He had found her again that same evening in the palace garden, far from the music. "You felt it," he had said. She had nodded. Ethan had looked toward the glowing palace windows before answering. "No one can know yet." Claire should have understood the warning hidden inside those words. Instead, she had heard hope. For months, their bond existed only in stolen conversations where nothing improper ever passed between them. Only words, promises, and the careful tenderness of two people discovering one another. Ethan told her about the loneliness of becoming king too young. Claire told him about growing up in a small Western pack, where Omegas were expected to stay useful and unnoticed. With her, Ethan was not the alpha king whose arrival silenced entire halls. He was simply a man who sometimes laughed when he forgot to be guarded. Then the months became years. Each time Claire asked when the truth would be known, Ethan had another reason to wait. A border agreement. An unstable alliance. A council vote. Soon, he always said. Claire had believed soon was a destination. Now she understood it had been a place where Ethan could keep her indefinitely. Omega Bennett. Elder Hayes's voice pulled Claire back into the chamber. Claire raised her eyes. "Yes, Elder. You understand what His Majesty's statement means." Before Claire could answer, Counselor Damien Cole leaned forward. He was a narrow-faced man in a charcoal suit, his expression polite enough to make his contempt feel almost civilized. "It means the matter is settled. Miss Bennett appears to have misunderstood the nature of her relationship with the king." A few counselors exchanged glances. Claire felt Ethan tense across the room. Still, he said nothing. Damien continued. "Given the seriousness of claiming a royal mate bond where none exists, the council may require a formal acknowledgement from Miss Bennett." Claire looked at Ethan. This was the moment. Surely this was where he would stop them. Surely whatever political bargain had forced that single word from his mouth did not include allowing them to call her dishonest. Ethan's fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. His eyes met hers for half a second, full of conflict, then dropped away. Something inside Claire settled. Not healed, not forgiven. Settled. She finally understood the shape of his choice. He had not only chosen the throne over her. He expected her to quietly carry the shame of that choice, so he would not have to. Damien slid a sheet of paper across the long table. "A simple statement will be sufficient. You acknowledge that no recognized mate bond existed, and that any contrary impression resulted from your own misunderstanding." Claire stared at the paper. The silver bracelet around her wrist suddenly felt heavier than iron. Ethan had given it to her during their second winter together. "Until I can give you my name before everyone," he had said, fastening the clasp. "Keep this as my promise." Claire lifted her wrist slowly. Ethan saw the bracelet. His face changed. "Claire," he said. The council went still. She turned the bracelet once beneath her thumb, feeling the crescent engraved into the silver. Then she looked directly at the man who had asked her to trust him and had answered that trust with silence. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice so calm that even she barely recognized it. "Before I sign anything, I would like one question answered." "What would you like answered, Miss Bennett?" Elder Hayes asked, but Claire kept her eyes on Ethan. The chamber seemed to contract around the distance between them, 10 feet of polished stone suddenly feeling wider than the entire Northern Territory. Ethan had always been difficult to read in public. He had trained himself too well. Kings did not flinch. Kings did not hesitate. Kings did not let a room full of powerful people see what frightened them. But Claire knew the small signs. The slight tension in his shoulders. The way his right hand curled against the carved armrest. The silence that lasted one beat too long. She had seen those things in private when border reports came at midnight, when difficult decisions waited on his desk, when the weight of the crown sat heavier than usual. She had never expected to see them because of her. "You said there is no mate bond between us," Claire said. Her voice remained level. "Is that your final statement before this council?" A faint murmur moved through the room. Damien Cole straightened. "His Majesty has already answered that question." Claire turned her head slightly. "I asked His Majesty." The murmur stopped. For the first time that morning, several counselors looked at her not with pity, but attention. Ethan rose from his chair. The movement was controlled, almost too controlled. Claire, this is not necessary. There it was again. Her name spoken softly, as though softness could repair what had been done publicly. It is necessary to me. His expression tightened. Damien intervened before Ethan could respond. This council is not a place for personal grievances. The king has made his position clear. Miss Bennett should sign the statement so we can proceed to matters of governance. Claire looked at the paper resting before her. A confession written by someone else. A neat arrangement of words designed to make Ethan's decision clean. She would become confused, ambitious, mistaken. He would remain honorable. The council would remain orderly. Everyone would leave with the world exactly where they wanted it. Claire placed both hands behind her back so she would not touch the paper. I will not sign something that is false. Damien's polite expression cooled. You are suggesting the Alpha King lied before the council? Claire felt every eye turn toward her. Ethan's gaze sharpened, not in anger, but warning. He knew how dangerous the question was politically. Claire knew too. 3 years beside him had taught her more about royal strategy than anyone in the room suspected. That was why she chose her words carefully. I am saying only that I know what I experienced. Damien leaned back. Feelings are not evidence. No, Claire said. But royal records are. Ethan went very still. Claire continued. 3 years ago, after the Moon Harvest Festival, His Majesty ordered the palace physician to examine the bond response between us. A counselor near the end of the table frowned. Another turned toward Ethan. Elder Hayes lowered her gaze to the documents in front of her. Is there such a record? Ethan did not answer immediately. Damien did. Any private medical record would be sealed. Sealed is not the same as non-existent, Claire said. Ethan closed his eyes for the briefest moment. Claire understood then. Damien had expected her to stay quiet because she had always protected Ethan's secrets. That assumption had been the foundation of their entire plan. Enough, Ethan said. His voice was low, but the room obeyed. He stepped down from the raised platform until only a few feet separated them. Claire, please. She almost smiled at the word. Please. So different from trust me, and somehow much more honest. You asked me to trust you this morning, she said quietly. I did. Something moved across his face. Pain, perhaps. Or shame. There are things you do not understand. Claire felt the old version of herself reach for that sentence. The woman who would have nodded and waited. The woman who believed love meant making herself smaller whenever his responsibilities grew too large. She let that woman go, then explained them. Ethan glanced toward the council. Not here. Claire's heart gave one slow, heavy beat. You denied me here. The words landed without force, which somehow made them stronger. Ethan looked at her as though she had taken away the last excuse he possessed. Behind him, Damien rose. This has gone far enough. Miss Bennett will sign the statement, or the council will formally record her refusal to accept the king's declaration. Claire turned toward him. And what happens then? Damien hesitated. Only for a second. The council will determine whether further action is required. Against me. If necessary. Ethan's head snapped toward Damien. That was not the agreement. The room fell silent. Claire did not move. She did not need to. The truth had finally entered the chamber on its own. Damien's expression hardened. Ethan seemed to realize what he had revealed, but it was too late. Claire looked from one man to the other. The throne. The bargain. The silence. The paper prepared before she ever entered the room. This had never been a question of whether Ethan believed in their bond. It had been a decision made before she arrived. And somehow, everyone involved had assumed the Omega would simply accept the cost. Claire looked at Ethan, and for the first time that morning, she did not see the Alpha King. She saw the man who had believed he could control every consequence simply because he had always controlled the room. What agreement? Elder Hayes asked. Her voice was quiet now, dangerous in its calm. Ethan did not answer immediately. Damien Cole did. A political arrangement concerning continuity of the crown. Nothing more. Claire turned toward him. An arrangement that required me to be called a liar? Damien's mouth tightened. An arrangement that required discretion. That is not the same thing. Ethan stepped between them, not blocking Claire, but drawing the council's attention back to himself. The agreement was that I would make no formal claim today. There was never supposed to be any accusation against Claire. Then you should have considered the natural consequence of your statement, Damien replied. Once you denied the bond, the council had to explain why she believed one existed. Claire felt something inside her become very still. There it was, spoken plainly. She was not a person in their plan. She was an explanation, a problem to be filed away beneath cleaner language. Elder Hayes folded her hands. Your Majesty, did you enter this chamber intending to deny a bond you privately believed to be real? Ethan's jaw tightened. The silence answered before he did. Claire watched him struggle between honesty and the throne, and suddenly she was tired. Not angry, not shattered, tired. 3 years of waiting had drained away in less than an hour. Ethan, she said. He looked at her immediately. The use of his name drew several startled glances, but Claire barely noticed. Do you stand by what you said? His face changed. Claire, it is a simple question. Not here. You already answered it here. The chamber went quiet again. Ethan took one step closer. His voice dropped. You do not know what they threatened. Claire's chest tightened, but she held his gaze. Then tell me. He looked toward the council table, then back to her. If I formally recognized you today, 3 ruling houses were prepared to withdraw their support from the Northern Alliance. 2 border pacts threatened to challenge succession law. Damien believed the council could remove key authorities from the crown before winter. Claire listened. Every reason sounded serious. Every reason sounded like something a king should fear. But none changed what had happened. So you chose the kingdom, she said. Ethan's expression softened with something that looked almost like relief. I was trying to protect it. Claire nodded once. I understand. His shoulders eased. That hurt more than she expected. He thought understanding meant forgiveness. He thought seeing the weight he carried meant she would help carry it again. But you also chose for me, she continued. Ethan's relief disappeared. You decided I would accept being denied. You decided I would remain silent when they questioned my character. You decided I would still be here after everyone left this room. Claire, that is not what I wanted. But it is what you expected. He had no answer. She lifted her wrist and touched the silver bracelet. Ethan's eyes followed the movement. 3 years ago, you told me this meant something. His voice came rougher now. It does. A faint reaction moved through the council. Claire looked around the chamber, then back to him. You just told them it does not. What I said publicly does not change what exists between us. Claire stared at him. For one heartbeat, she almost could not believe he had said it. Then everything became clear. Ethan truly believed he could divide reality into 2 worlds. In one, the council heard there was no bond. In the other, Claire remained quietly tied to him. He would keep his crown. He would keep her. And only she would pay the price of holding both truths. So that is what you thought, she whispered. Ethan frowned. What? You thought you could deny the bond without losing it. His face went pale. Elder Hayes slowly raised her head. Something in her expression changed, as though Claire had just opened a door no one else had considered. Miss Bennett, she said carefully, there is an old provision in mate law that may be relevant here. Damien turned sharply. There is no need to discuss archaic provisions. I will decide what is relevant in my chamber, Elder Hayes replied. Claire's heartbeat quickened. Ethan looked toward Hayes with sudden concern. What provision? The elder studied Claire for a long moment. When one bonded mate publicly denies the bond before recognized witnesses, the other may petition to release that bond before the same authority. The room became completely silent. Claire felt Ethan's attention snap back to her. She looked down at the bracelet, then slowly raised her eyes. A release? She asked. Elder Hayes nodded. A complete one. Ethan moved before he seemed to realize he was moving. No. The word came faster this time. Not calculated. Not royal. Afraid. Claire met his stare, and something almost peaceful settled over her. Why not? She asked softly. If there is no bond, Your Majesty, what exactly would I be releasing? For several seconds, no one in the chamber moved. Ethan stared at Claire as if the question itself had changed the shape of the room. This is not necessary, he said at last. Claire almost laughed, but there was no humor left in her. You have said that before. Elder Hayes glanced toward the old leather-bound volume resting beside her papers. The law is clear. If Miss Bennett chooses to petition for release, the council must hear it. Damien rose from his seat. This discussion should be postponed. Why? Claire asked. Damien looked at Ethan instead of answering her. That told Claire enough. Ethan descended the final step from the royal platform until he stood only a few feet away. Up close, the control he wore so easily before others was beginning to crack. His breathing was measured, but too deliberate. "Claire, come with me. We can speak privately." She shook her head. "No." His eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but disbelief. She had almost never refused him so directly. "Please." The word was quiet. Claire felt the bond between them respond to his voice, a familiar warmth tugging somewhere deep inside her. For years, that feeling had comforted her. Now it only reminded her how much of herself she had placed in his hands. "You made your decision in front of everyone," she said. "I will make mine the same way." Ethan lowered his voice. "I never intended to lose you." Claire studied his face. There was honesty there now, but it had arrived too late to feel like mercy. "Then what did you intend?" He hesitated. "I thought I could buy time. By denying me. By protecting the crown until I could change the council." Claire looked toward the rows of representatives, then back at him. "And what was I supposed to do while you bought that time?" Ethan said nothing. "Wait in the hidden hallways? Keep wearing your promise where no one could see it? Let them call me confused while you came to find me after the doors closed?" His expression tightened. "I would never have let them punish you. You already let them shame me." The words were soft, but Ethan flinched. Claire touched the silver bracelet again. "You thought the bond would still be there after today." Ethan's silence answered. "You thought I would still be there." His eyes finally dropped. "Yes," he admitted. Claire felt something inside her ache, not because the answer surprised her, but because it did not. "That is the problem, Ethan. You thought you could lose me in public and keep me in private." The chamber became so quiet that Claire could hear the faint ticking of the clock near the western doors. Ethan looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for once there was no crown between them. Only regret. "I was afraid," he said. Claire swallowed. She had waited years to hear him admit weakness. She wished it mattered more now. "So was I." Ethan took one careful step forward. "Then do not make a permanent decision because of one terrible morning." Claire shook her head. "This is not because of one morning. This morning only showed me what 3 years had become." Elder Hayes opened the old volume. "Miss Bennett, if you intend to proceed, there is one requirement. The petition must be completed before the council adjourns at midnight." Claire glanced toward the tall windows. Afternoon light had begun to soften across the stone floor. Hours remained. Ethan heard it too. Claire saw the calculation enter his eyes before something gentler replaced it. "You have until midnight," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "No, Ethan. We have until midnight." By late afternoon, the council chamber had emptied into adjoining rooms while Elder Hayes prepared the ancient release record. Claire stood alone beside a tall window overlooking the northern courtyard, watching gray clouds gather above the palace roofs. She had imagined freedom would feel lighter. Instead, it felt strangely quiet. The bond was still there, faint but unmistakable, a soft pull beneath her ribs whenever Ethan moved somewhere nearby. For years, she had taken comfort in knowing where he was without seeing him. Now every pulse of that connection felt like a clock counting down. The door opened behind her. She did not turn. "Claire." Ethan's voice carried no authority this time, only exhaustion. "Elder Hayes said you asked for an hour before the council reconvenes." "I did." He stopped several feet away. "May I stay?" The question surprised her. Ethan Blackwood rarely asked permission to enter any room in his own palace. Claire looked over her shoulder. His formal coat was gone, leaving him in a simple white shirt with the sleeves buttoned at his wrists. Without the throne behind him, he looked less like a king and more like the man who once sat with her in the library until sunrise because neither wanted the conversation to end. That memory almost weakened her. "Almost. You can stay," she said. Ethan moved to the opposite side of the window, but did not come closer. "I have been thinking about what you said." Claire waited. "You were right." The admission came quietly. "I expected you to remain." She looked down at the bracelet. "Why?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Because you always had." There was no cruelty in the answer. That made it worse. "Every delay, every excuse, every time I told you the timing was wrong, you stayed. I convinced myself that meant you understood." "I did understand." Claire turned to face him. "I understood the pressure. I understood the alliances. I understood that being king meant carrying things I never had to carry." Ethan met her eyes. "Then why does this have to end?" "Because understanding your reasons does not erase what they cost me." He looked away. Outside, a bell rang somewhere beyond the courtyard. 5 o'clock. 7 hours remained. Ethan rested one hand against the stone window ledge. I could stop this. Claire went still. How? The council exists under royal authority. I could adjourn the session before midnight. Without the council present, the release cannot be completed today. Claire stared at him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan closed his eyes. And that would prove everything you said about me. Claire felt the bond tighten faintly between them. He had finally seen it. Not because she explained it again, but because he had reached the answer himself. You could keep me tied to you, she said. Yes. But you could not make me choose you. Ethan opened his eyes. No. The word was barely above a whisper. Claire expected relief. Instead, sadness moved through her, deep and clean. Ethan stepped back from the window. I will not adjourn the council. She searched his face. Even if I go through with it. His throat moved before he answered. Especially then. Claire's fingers rested over the silver bracelet. For the first time that day, she saw something in him that looked like the man she had once trusted. Not because he was fighting to keep her, because he was finally refusing to use his power to prevent her from leaving. Ethan turned toward the door, then stopped. Claire, there is something I need you to know. She waited. Whatever happens before midnight, I am sorry that it took losing the right to decide for you before I understood that I never had it. Claire did not answer immediately. Outside, the clouds shifted, and a narrow line of evening light crossed the floor between them. Thank you, she said at last. It was not forgiveness. Ethan seemed to understand that. He nodded once and left. Claire listened until his footsteps disappeared down the corridor. Then she looked at the bracelet on her wrist and realized the hardest part was no longer deciding whether to release him. It was accepting that she still loved him enough to wish he had learned this lesson sooner. At 11:20 that night, Claire returned to the council chamber, wearing none of the things Ethan had once imagined beside her. No royal colors. No ceremonial jewels. No cloak bearing the Blackwood crest. She wore a simple navy dress with long sleeves and carried nothing except the silver bracelet still fastened around her wrist. The chamber felt different after dark. The tall windows had become black mirrors, reflecting rows of counselors beneath warm chandeliers, and the long stone walls seemed quieter without daylight. Elder Hayes sat at the center table with the ancient record open before her. Damian Cole stood near the far end, speaking in a low voice to two representatives. He stopped when Claire entered. Several people turned. Some looked curious, some uncomfortable. A few still looked at her, as though they expected the Omega from that morning to return with lowered eyes and an apology prepared. Claire walked to the center of the room and stopped beside the same place where the unsigned statement still rested. She did not look at it. Her attention went to the empty throne. Ethan was not there. A small part of her had expected that. Perhaps he had changed his mind. Perhaps the temptation to end the session had been stronger than the promise he made beside the window. The thought hurt more than she wanted it to. Elder Hayes glanced toward the clock. We have 40 minutes. Damian stepped forward. There is still time to resolve this without invoking an obsolete law. Claire met his gaze. Nothing about my decision requires your approval. His expression tightened. You should understand that separating yourself from the crown may have consequences. Protection, position, access to royal resources. Claire almost smiled. Even now, he believed fear could return her to the place she had left that morning. I had none of those publicly yesterday, she said. I will survive without pretending I had them tomorrow. The main doors opened behind her. Claire did not need to turn immediately. The bond told her before the footsteps did. Ethan. The familiar pull beneath her ribs grew warmer, stronger, almost painful in its recognition. She closed her eyes for 1 second, then faced him. He entered alone. No royal guard. No formal cloak. Only the dark suit he had worn earlier, now without the silver chain of office. He walked toward the council table and stopped several feet behind Claire. Damian moved quickly. Your Majesty, I assume you have reconsidered. You can adjourn this session immediately. Ethan looked at him. No. Damian blinked. The stability of the crown requires you to prevent this. The stability of the crown does not require Claire to surrender her freedom. The room shifted around those words. Claire felt it in the silence, in the counselors sitting straighter, in Elder Hayes watching Ethan with new attention. Damian lowered his voice. You are permitting an Omega to dictate terms to the throne. Ethan's expression hardened, but his voice remained calm. She is not dictating terms to me. She is making a decision about herself. Claire stared at him. She had waited 3 years for Ethan to speak about her this clearly before other people. It was strange how much she had wanted these words once, and how different they felt now that they came without a promise attached. Damien looked toward the clock. You still have the authority to stop the hearing. Ethan did not look away from Claire. I know. Then use it. A long pause followed. Claire saw the struggle in his face, but this time he did not hide from it. No, he said again. Let her speak. The words moved through Claire more deeply than any declaration he had ever whispered in private. Not because they asked her to stay, because they gave her room to leave. Elder Hayes closed the smaller record before her and drew the ancient volume to the center of the table. Very well. Claire Bennett stepped forward. Claire moved toward the table. Her shoes made soft sounds against the stone floor. When she reached the place indicated, she slowly removed the silver bracelet from her wrist for the first time in 3 years. The skin beneath it looked strangely pale. Ethan's breath caught behind her. Claire held the bracelet in her palm for a moment, remembering winter nights, quiet libraries, promises spoken where no one could challenge them. Then she placed it on the council table. The small sound of silver touching would seem impossibly loud. Elder Hayes looked from Claire to Ethan. Once the final words are spoken, the bond cannot be restored by authority, title, or decree. Do you both understand? Claire answered first. Yes. Ethan was silent for one heartbeat. Yes. Claire turned toward him. For the first time that day, there was nothing hidden between them. No secret promise. No political excuse. No private version of the truth. Only a choice waiting to be made in full view of everyone who had once expected her to disappear quietly. Ethan looked at the bracelet, then at Claire. He did not reach for either, and Claire understood that this was the first thing he had done all day that made leaving him harder. Claire stood before Ethan with the silver bracelet resting between them on the council table, and for the first time since morning, she no longer felt like the smallest person in the room. Elder Hayes rose slowly, one hand resting on the open pages of the ancient record. Claire Bennett, the law requires that you speak freely and without coercion. Do you understand? I do. Her voice did not tremble. Ethan watched her with an expression Claire had never seen before. There was no authority in it. No calculation. Only the terrible understanding that there was nothing left for him to command. Elder Hayes turned to him. Ethan Blackwood, you have already affirmed that you will not interfere with this proceeding. Do you maintain that decision? Ethan looked at Claire. The clock on the western wall marked 11:48. 12 minutes remained until midnight. He could still stop everything with a word. Claire knew it. So did everyone else. I do, he said. Damien Cole shifted sharply in his chair, but Ethan did not acknowledge him. Elder Hayes nodded. Then proceed. Claire looked down at the bracelet. She remembered the night Ethan gave it to her, snow brushing the library windows while he fastened the silver around her wrist. He had promised that one day the whole kingdom would know what she meant to him. For 3 years, Claire had believed the bracelet represented a future waiting to arrive. Now she understood that promises could become cages when only one person decided when they would be honored. She lifted her eyes to Ethan. This morning, you told this council there was nothing between us. His face tightened. Claire continued before he could speak. I spent years protecting what we had because I believed protecting you meant protecting us. I accepted silence when I wanted honesty. I accepted waiting when I wanted a life beside you. I told myself that patience was love. Ethan swallowed. Claire. She shook her head gently. Please let me finish. He nodded. That simple permission almost broke her composure. Claire drew a slow breath. I do not believe you never cared for me. That would make this easier. I believe you cared for me and still believed I would always be available whenever you were finally ready to choose me. Ethan lowered his eyes. You were right. Claire felt the bond stir between them, warm and familiar, as though it sensed what was coming and wanted to remind her of every good thing. Quiet laughter in the library. Long walks beneath autumn trees. His hand reaching for hers when no one was watching. Those moments had been real. That was why. Letting them go hurt. I loved you, Claire said. Ethan looked up quickly. She corrected herself softly. I still do. The room seemed to hold its breath. But loving you cannot require me to disappear whenever being seen beside me becomes inconvenient. Ethan's eyes shone under the warm chamber lights. I know that now. Claire nodded. I believe you. That surprised him. But learning the right lesson does not erase the choice that taught it. Elder Hayes remained silent, allowing Claire the time she needed. Claire reached for the bracelet and held it between both hands. The silver felt cool against her palms. Ethan Blackwood, you denied before these witnesses that I was ever bound to you. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. He did not look away. Claire felt the bond pull stronger, almost like a memory asking not to be forgotten. Her heart ached, but her voice remained steady. So before the same witnesses, I give you exactly what you asked for. She placed the bracelet on the open record. I release you. For one suspended second, nothing happened. Then a faint silver light appeared between them, no brighter than moonlight reflected on water. Claire felt warmth rise through her chest and travel outward, not painfully, but gently, like a door opening after being closed for too long. The invisible pull she had carried for 3 years loosened. Ethan drew a sudden breath. The silver light thinned, flickered once, and disappeared. Claire felt the absence immediately. She could no longer sense where Ethan stood without looking. The quiet inside her was enormous. Ethan reached toward her on instinct. His hand stopped halfway. Claire looked at it, then at him. Once, she would have crossed any distance to take that hand. Tonight she stepped back one pace. Ethan let his arm fall. The grief in his face was unmistakable, but so was something else. Respect. Elder Hayes closed the record. The release is witnessed and complete. No one spoke. Damien stared at the table. Several counselors lowered their eyes. Claire looked at her bare wrist. For 3 years, she had feared that losing Ethan would mean losing part of herself. Instead, standing there beneath the chandeliers with nothing binding her to a king, she felt something returning. Ethan spoke her name quietly. Claire. She met his gaze. This time there was no bond forcing her attention toward him. She looked because she chose to. I am sorry, he said. Claire believed him. She also understood that belief did not require her to stay. I know. Then she turned from the council table and began walking toward the doors. No one ordered her to stop. No one asked her to lower her head. Behind her stood the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories, surrounded by every symbol of authority he had once been afraid to lose. Yet as Claire crossed the chamber alone, Ethan understood the truth the crown had hidden from him for years. Power could make an entire council obey. It could not make one woman choose to remain. 3 months later, Claire woke to sunlight instead of palace bells. Her new home stood at the edge of a small mountain town nearly 200 miles west of the capital, where pine trees climbed the hills and no one cared who had once sat beside an alpha king. She rented 2 rooms above a quiet bookshop and spent her mornings helping the owner organize deliveries, her afternoons teaching young Omegas how to read old pack records, and her evenings walking beneath a sky that belonged to no throne. At first, the silence inside her had frightened her. For 3 years, the bond had been a constant presence, a soft awareness of Ethan somewhere in the world. After the release, she would sometimes wake at night expecting to feel him and find nothing. But slowly, absence stopped feeling like emptiness. It became space. Space to decide what she liked without wondering whether Ethan would approve. Space to make plans that did not depend on council schedules. Space to become Claire Bennett again. News from the capital still reached the town. Ethan had dismissed Damien Cole from his advisory position within a week. Then he had introduced a new law before the council stating that no bonded person, regardless of rank, could be publicly denied while privately required to maintain the bond. The law passed after weeks of debate. Claire read the announcement twice, then folded the newspaper and returned to shelving books. She was glad. She was also glad he had done it without asking her to praise him. Early one October afternoon, Claire was carrying a box of returned books toward the front counter when the bell above the shop door rang. I will be with you in a moment, she called. Take your time. Her hand stopped. She knew that voice. Not because a bond pulled at her chest. Nothing did. She knew it because some memories remained even after magic was gone. Claire set the box down and turned. Ethan stood just inside the doorway. No guards waited behind him. No royal coat covered his shoulders. He wore a dark sweater beneath a plain charcoal jacket, and there was something almost unfamiliar about seeing him without symbols of office. He looked tired, but lighter. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan gave a small, uncertain smile. Hello, Claire. Her heart moved in a way she had not expected. Hello, Ethan. His eyes briefly dropped to her bare wrist, then returned to her face. I heard you were here. Claire leaned one hand against the counter. Kings usually have people who know things. I asked them not to tell me at first. That surprised her. Ethan looked around the shop. I thought finding you before you were ready would only be another way of deciding for you. Claire studied him carefully. What changed? Nothing about you. He paused. Something about me, I hope. The shop owner quietly disappeared through the back door, leaving them alone without making the gesture obvious. Ethan remained near the entrance. He did not move closer. I did not come to ask you to return to the palace. Claire said nothing. I did not come to ask you to restore anything either. Elder Hayes made it very clear that what ended cannot simply be reclaimed. A trace of sadness crossed his face, but he did not hide it. Good, Claire said gently. Because I would have sent you home. Ethan almost laughed. I suspected that. The sound was small, but real, and for a moment Claire remembered the library before everything became complicated. Ethan took a slow breath. I changed the law. I know. I wanted to. Tell you why. Claire waited. Not because I thought it would bring you back. I changed it because I finally understood that what happened to you should never happen to anyone else. Claire felt warmth behind her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. That matters. Ethan nodded. There is something else. He seemed more nervous saying those words than he had facing the entire council. For most of my life, I have been taught that being alpha meant protecting what belonged to me. His gaze held hers. I think I confused protecting with possessing. You taught me the difference. Claire looked toward the window. Autumn leaves moved along the sidewalk outside, pushed gently by the afternoon wind. I did not leave so that you would become a better man for me. I know. His answer came immediately. You left because you needed to become free for yourself. That was when Claire looked at him again. He understood. Maybe not perfectly. Maybe not enough to erase what had happened. But he understood more than the man who had stood on the royal platform 3 months earlier. Ethan slipped his hands into his coat pockets, almost as though he did not trust them to reach for her. There is no bond telling you to listen to me now. There is no law connecting us. No promise. No obligation. No. So I have one question. Claire waited. Ethan's voice softened. Would you let me know you again? She blinked. Know me? Not as my mate. Not as a future Luna. Not as someone waiting for me. His smile was nervous now. Just Claire. Something inside her loosened. Not the old bond. Something quieter. Something entirely human. And who would you be? She asked. Ethan glanced toward the door, then back to her. Hopefully just Ethan. Claire looked at the man before her and thought about the strange cruelty and kindness of second chances. They did not erase the first ending. They did not make pain necessary or betrayal meaningful. They simply offered a new decision where once there had only been destiny. Fate already chose once, Claire said. Ethan's expression grew still. She stepped from behind the counter. This time we choose. Ethan slowly extended his hand, then stopped before reaching her, leaving the final few inches between them untouched. Claire looked down at his open palm. Once, an invisible bond had made that distance feel impossible to resist. Now nothing pulled her forward. Nothing commanded her. Nothing promised that choosing him would be easy. Claire smiled softly and placed her hand in his because, this time, the choice was entirely her own.